Because it's you, I showed up, but my wife is giving birth right now, so I showed up for you. I'm just totally kidding with you.
I was going to actually shut down the call if that's the case, you know.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100,000.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Life is fast and full of opportunity.
All right, we're keeping that in there. Dr. Jeremy Wise here. I'm founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90X, Baby Einstein, Atari, many more, how they overcome big challenges in life and business. I am very excited today. We have Greg McKeown, who's author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. Now, Greg, many past interviewees, including Brian Kurtz, tout this as one of their favorite books of all time. And just to demonstrate the effect of your message on these serious entrepreneurs, I spoke to Brian this morning. I know this is one of his favorite books. So I'm like, what do you think I should ask Greg? And he said, and by the way, Brian helped Boardroom Inc. wrote a $150 million company. And he said to me, Greg, he felt like a schoolgirl when he met you at the Genius Network event. I said, can I say that on the interview? He said, no problem. So...
It's a nice compliment.
Yeah, it's a compliment. Yeah,
it's a slightly scary compliment.
It is scary. So I'm in his mastermind, and he gave your book to everyone. I know he's bought over 100 copies of your book to give out. And just to mention, Greg's spoken at companies like Apple, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Pixar, Salesforce, just to name a few. And this is also one of my favorite books. If you answer yes to any of these questions, then this book is a must for you. And that's why I've listened to it many times. And have you ever found yourself stretched too thin? Check for me, yes. Does your day sometimes get hijacked by someone else's agenda? Check, yes. Have you ever said yes simply to please and then resented it? Now, Greg has dedicated his career to discovering why some people break through to the next level and why others don't. Greg, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So answer that question first. Why do some people break through to the next level and others don't?
Well, I noticed the phenomenon at first working with super successful, driven executive teams in Silicon Valley. And I noticed that there was this pattern. When they were focused on the right few things at the right time, they could generate tremendous momentum. As they all, the whole team can coalesce together and just make something happen. So that's great, and that's to be expected. But then, what did it lead to? Success, right? That is also quite logical. And what came with the success? Options and opportunities. Yeah. Now, that sounds like the right problem to have, but it does, in fact, turn out to be a problem if it leads to what Jim Collins has called the undisciplined pursuit of more. And that really, if you get pulled into the undisciplined pursuit of more, then it can undermine the very things that led to success in the first place. And so, I am maybe exaggerating in order to make this point, but success can become a catalyst for failure. And so the whole of essentialism, the book, but also behind it, the movement, the company, all of it is trying to address that particular challenge. It's the antidote to that challenge. Yeah. The antidote is the disciplined pursuit of less but better.
Yeah. And I like the word discipline. How do you stay focused? I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day. I was talking to Dan Cashel, CEO of the Genius Network, actually, and we were chatting, and we were joking around that we were saying, why did this person stop doing this part of their business? And he just kind of laughed and said, we're entrepreneurs. It was working too well, and we got bored of it.
Yeah.
So how do you stay focused on essentialism, essentially? What do you tell entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, I think that the idea is to become really selective. Not a little more selective, really selective. So you think about your closet, and The average closet has a ton of stuff in it. It's sort of overloaded. And then eventually somebody says, well, listen, I'm just fed up with this. I'm going to organize my closet. Mm-hmm. But in the moment of taking something off the shelf, something magical happens. Something mysterious happens. Not magical, no, that's wrong. Mysterious. Because it's suddenly, we think, well, maybe I want to, maybe it will come back into fashion again one day. Or maybe it will fit me again one day. And the problem is that this approach means that thing goes back on the shelf. But using that criteria, we don't know we're using criteria, but using that criteria is so broad that everything is a yes. I mean, the question we're asking is, could this ever be useful to me ever again in the future? Possibly. Yeah. Well, of course, the answer is yes to everything, and so we don't get rid of anything. So I'm putting to people that the solution to that in a closet is to become incredibly. You ask, do I love it? Do I wear it often? Recently the question has become popular, a very essentialist question, which is, does it spark joy? Mm-hmm. Does this item spark joy for me? And if the answer is no, then you pass it on or give it away or throw it away. The same approach, I think, can be applied to life. Yeah. It was said by David Sivers in a fabulous blog piece. He said, no more yes. It's either hell yeah or no. Yeah. And that is a very different criteria in life. That is a very particular approach. And I think it's the approach that has the power of relevancy now.
Yeah. One thing that makes me think of, I ask you that because I'm like, I'm thinking in my mind, does Greg get bored of talking about essentialism all day long, every single day? And then I remembered what you told me before we got on, and you're like, well, you have Essential Live now. So what is Essential Live?
Well, we got a call, this was literally like 3 or 4 weeks ago, get a call from somebody that just really sparked some thoughts about trying to launch a social experiment for a year. Mm-hmm. And trying to take on like the whole city of LA or, the whole of Silicon Valley or even beyond. And it just got our imagination going about what is possible. Mm-hmm. We've spent, the book came out about a year and a half ago. We've spent the last year and a half doing a lot of interesting work with a lot of interesting companies and conferences, and we hold a very, I hate the word elite, so I don't want to really use that word, but really selective group of executives comes together to sort of strive to become essentialists, and we hold it in Napa Valley in California. Right? Okay, great. But what about everybody else? And when I say everybody, I just mean students. I mean students like 8-year-olds. Middle school students, high school students, college students, every kind of leader in every kind of organization or no organization at all. How could you help everybody to create space to design their most essential life? And so we just began, and I'm candid to say that we're we're bold enough to be rubbish if necessary. We don't know how to really have a social movement of the kind that we are describing now. We don't know how to do it, and maybe we'll fail completely. But so far, it's been electric to watch people respond, to watch people of every kind of demographic want to be involved. And I don't want to give away too much, but the most recent conversations we've been having, I think, are very exciting for how we could imagine telling the stories of these people, and that's important. That's I think a mistake I made early on over the last year or two. Which is what? Something. Well, I mean, if you go to my website, right? If you go to gregmckeown.com, you find, I mean, hopefully a perfectly reasonable website. Nothing terribly bad about that website. But here's the problem: is both the name and the way it's designed. The camera's on me, right? The site is gregmckeown.com, and like almost every other thought leader, that's what the site is. And of course, you try to put the camera onto the ideas, but what I want to do over this year is turn the camera completely around and put it on and tell the stories of these extraordinarily compelling stories of people who are grappling with essentialism, the successes, the failures, all of it. So our latest idea with this, I mean, this is completely hot off the press, but is that we want to we're going to have people, anyone who wants to be involved with it, will keep a documentary diary about their experiences for the year. Ups, downs, middle, everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you should do it. I really think so.
Yeah.
If it sounds like something that would interest you, and everybody who's part of this conversation today should
you
do it
talk
too.
about in your book how you journal, how you create that space too.
Right.
Yeah.
I do, and I think that's one of the few traditions in my life I'm just like absolutely adamant not to lose, no matter what. So I did it last night. I do it every night.
Same time, every night.
Yeah, I do it. I mean, it's not like a set time. It's just the last thing I do before I go to sleep.
Yeah.
So that can be different. But I don't miss it. So it's been I've hardly missed it. I don't think I have missed a day in probably the last 4.5 years.
Wow.
But I certainly haven't missed many in the last decade. And to me, the idea of not just living, but pausing to think about living is really important. I remember a friend once said to me, they said, Greg, I was asking them some question. You can imagine this. It might be a bit irritating to have a friend who's an aspiring essentialist. But I was asking them some question, and they said, Greg, I'm too busy living to think about life.
That's interesting.
Yeah, right. I thought that was just a fabulous one-liner that I wanted to sort of hold on to forever after that. I think a lot of us feel like that today, even if we wouldn't say it as clearly as that. And so I think there's a way to have a lot of people start to become more conscious of the choices they're making, of the options that are before them, and how they're choosing to utilize these finite resources of time and energy and so on, in a way that could inspire a generation. And so we are boldly trying to do this.
So where can people check out Essential Live?
Well, right now they just can go to essentiallive.tv.
Okay.
That's sort of we just put up the landing page just barely. It's a little bit like on the walls of Facebook. There's one of the quotes there that says "Done is better than perfect."
Yeah.
And it strains me a little bit because I like to.
It's not perfect yet.
I don't aspire to be a perfectionist at all, but I do aspire to less but better. And so there is a tension between that and just getting things done.
Right.
But we're definitely in the mode of getting things done with this, and we've just we're in conversation, partnering with a documentary filmmaker to help us to do this and to tell this awesome story. Every person has a story to tell, and I think that essentialism is really not about essentialism. Essentialism is about people becoming more of who they are and less of who they aren't.
Yeah.
And I think it would be just really fascinating to watch people grapple with that over a year's period of time, to be able to see the struggles, the ups and downs, the decisions, and all of that that I think is so real for almost all of us today.
Yeah. So, Greg, what was interesting in your journal when you look back? I know you look back, over 90 days or so, on what that looks like. What was something interesting that you found from what you wrote in the past? The
thing that always surprises me, which must make me especially forgetful, because it really is the thing every 90 days. I'm like, wow, is how much progress has been made. I struggle with being so aspirational to achieve certain things that I can feel the gap between where I am right now and what it is I would really like to contribute to the world. And if you're not careful, you can feel, I can feel, not you, I can feel quite frustrated by that. And so for me, one of the reasons I keep a journal is that every day at the end of the day I get to at least express some gratitude for look at the progress that was made today. And when you extrapolate that every 90 days, I go through a journal almost exactly every 90 days. I don't try to do that, but that happens to be the tenure. So every time I'm done, I go through and read through, not word for word, but just flick through the whole journal. And I make a list of like the big things, the big items of progress. And I'm always struck by how much progress there's been. And I think that's true for a lot of people, that that they can feel like they're not winning as often as they actually are winning, that they're not doing as well as they actually are doing, because we're just living in this moment to moment. It's like our memory has been shrunk to the literally like email to email, just how long it takes to go check the phone to the time you check the phone again. And if something amazing hasn't happened in the last 2 minutes, then we feel like we might be failing.
We need a quick fix. Yeah,
exactly. And so that is always the thing that grabs me.
Yeah. And so, Greg, we were talking about a fun fact about you, and one thing you would never do, people have asked you. Yeah,
right. So, the first time that somebody asked me that question, my instant reaction was, listen to the Stones. I'm a Beatles man to the core. So that's it.
That's it. That's the only thing you would never do.
That sounds a little freakish, that too, doesn't it? There's probably a lot of things I would never do, but that's one fun fact.
So it all started when you were in law school, right? What happened?
Right. Well, a friend of mine, Sean Vanderhoven, called me and he said, listen, I want you to come to my wedding. And I was in England at the time and he's in Colorado, and he'd sent me tickets. So I felt, very obliged to go and also very excited to go. And so while I was physically so far away from home, somebody mentioned to me in passing, if you do decide to stay in America, then you should, do whatever. And it was the if that grabbed my attention. Like, there's an option.
Right.
Because I think in life people know in their minds, okay, you do have a choice, but often people do not feel they have a choice, and so in practical terms, it's as if they don't. And so suddenly there was permission to think about things. And so I remember brainstorming. Look, what would you do if you could do anything? Literally on a piece of paper, making this brainstorm 20 minutes, and afterwards I look at the piece of paper, and what I notice is not what is on the list, but what is not on the list.
Right.
And law school is not on the list, which was a problem because at the time I was at law school.
Right.
So what do you do? And I call the 15-digit number back to England, and my mother answers, fortunately.
Your dad would ream you out?
She says she listened for a while, and she said, I think you better talk to Dad. So he comes on the phone. Now, what would you say? Not a rhetorical question. What would you say to your son after all that time, all that money, all that effort? He's halfway across the world, and he calls up, hey, listen, I'm thinking about quitting law school. What are you going to say?
I would say, I told you not to go to law school. Why didn't you listen to me?
Yeah, he didn't say that.
Okay.
So he listens, and then he says, son, you know what we've always told you? And by the way, like, what he's always told me is go to law school.
So he said the opposite.
Apparently. And then, no, he says he quit. Because all Englishmen quote Shakespeare over tea and crumpets for breakfast in the morning.
Just the stereotype, yeah.
And he says, to thine own self be true, which is in Hamlet. It's Polonius talking to his son Laertes. Anyway, well, he'd never said that to me in his whole life, but nevertheless.
You're like, you should have told me that before you went to law school, or,
exactly.
Or thought
somewhere
about it.
That should,
yeah.
And so that was it. I quit law school. And
you just quit right then. Like, what was?
I did, yeah. And that was in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally at the beginning of essentialism in my life.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have that word, that language, or that framework. Yeah. But it has always left in me this I think increased awareness. Sometimes you still forget, but this generally increased awareness of you don't have to.
Yeah.
And so that was
How far along were you into law school at that point?
Almost the first year.
Okay.
Finished. So I hadn't done the final exams from the first year, but still.
You're like, I want to get out of these final exams. Done. Quit.
Yeah. I'm sure that was part of it when I think back to it. But I certainly recognize this isn't. I'm not loving this, but for me, I had the benefit, the blessing of being so far away from it, and I think that's one of the keys was that I was physically so removed in a different geography, and just other things seemed possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think in our day-to-day lives it's very hard to do. This was really where I had only a vague sense at the time, but that I wanted to teach and write. So in a way, I've described this, and I'm not trying to be, not trying to be participate in hyperbole here, but I certainly felt like, maybe I need to be a bit of a messenger in my life somehow. That there's something to
you knew
teach.
There was something
There's something. But it took me years and years to feel like I had discovered what that message was.
Yeah.
And that's really the second chapter of the story.
Yeah.
Is that so I continued. I had taught, had written, I co-authored books, and so and then I remember one of my colleagues at the time emailed me and said Friday would be a very bad time for your wife to have a baby because I need you to be at this client meeting.
Right.
I mean, she was expecting, otherwise that would have been an even odder email to send. But Friday comes along, and that is when my wife goes into labor, and we're in the hospital, and the baby is born. So wife and baby are well, and I'm there. But instead of being able to just enjoy the experience and be totally focused on it, I feel like I'm being pulled in both directions, and I have to do both. How can I keep both happy? And to my shame, I went to the meeting, and I remember afterwards, my colleague said that the client will respect you for the choice you just made. And I don't know that they did, but even if they did, I had made a fool's bargain. And that was really where I learned the message. The thing I needed to sort of give my professional life to was this simple idea: if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Yeah. And that was after that was a second story of quitting, right? First is quitting law school. I quit my job and launched This Inc., which is an organization committed to enabling people everywhere to develop the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set to live and lead as an essentialist. Yeah. That's the mission. That's the message.
Yeah, and Greg, that story in the book really hit home for me with the pregnancy, and the person said, oh yeah, they'll respect you for it. And I feel like the fool's bargain is sometimes with ourselves. Like I struggle I may have been both of those parties personally, right? The boss saying to myself, you know what I mean? So how do we internally, it's not even external, it's internal for me, saying, well, they'll respect me for doing that. I'm almost saying that to myself in this situation.
Well, you're bound to be. You're bound to be because we've been sold this idea very deeply for a very long time. And so I think that we're in a state right now that isn't just well, individually I have to choose to live a certain life. It's the culture of our times is the undisciplined pursuit of more. Right. That is the norm. Right. And so
the opposite of your subtitle. The opposite of your subtitle. Yeah.
I absolutely. And I think this is more true than I even realized when I wrote the book. Yeah. It is that just people everywhere in all levels of organizations, or none at all, feel this sense, a certain a certain madness. But here's the idea. Here's what's been peddled. Yeah. Is if I can fit it all in, then I can have it all. Right. And in fact, when people hear that, it has a truthiness about it. As if, yes, okay, that is right. I just shovel more coal and I can have everything I want. Right. But the problem is that it, in fact, isn't true. It has that inconvenience. It's a lie. So we've been sold a bill of goods. And unfortunately, the behavior that follows that false but dominant assumption is to sleep less, work more, just do more stuff. Yeah. It leaves people being exhausted. Certainly leaves them feeling sort of slightly meaningless. Yeah. Maybe not even slightly, but meaningless activity. And so I think the key is first naming this phenomenon. This is non-essentialism. Yeah. It's a whole way of living. It has a whole set of behaviors and beliefs. Yeah. And as soon as we name it, we start to realize how much of it has become internalized. It's almost like an air pollution that we're all breathing in all the time. And
Right.
you start to suddenly wake up and you're like, my goodness, I really do think this way now. I do believe this. I do think that if I sleep 1 hour less, that's like I'm going to get an hour more productivity. Never mind that what that actually does is drive our discernment down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suggest anyone, part of the book for this one story with the high-level executive with the micro-lending is a phenomenal story. So I would, for that point, I urge everyone in Essentialism to look out for that particular story, because you map that out from everything we've all thought about, getting less sleep, doing more, and just runs them into the ground. So I tell people, definitely listen to that part or read it if you're reading it. There's a couple things, and you mentioned a few things, which is really interesting. I'm really curious how you named this movement, but I have to go back in a second, because one thing you talk about is if, right? That going back to that person's question, they said if, and you realize you have a choice. So I was thinking when I read it or listened to it, when does this not apply? And for me, I was thinking, I want to ask you this question. Raising kids, okay, I want to make sure that my two kids, I know you have kids, embrace the if. You have choices, but then sometimes with raising them, you don't want to give them a choice when you're disciplining or doing certain things. So I'm curious of how you have your kids apply essentialism.
I mean, that's a bunch of different stories that come into my mind right now of this. Yeah. But I think I'll just start by saying, we do care about teaching essentialism to our children.
Yeah, for sure.
But not preaching about it all the time. But I mean, certainly all my children have heard me say, and probably too often, look, yes, we could do that, but there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing we've done that I think is.
I'd love to hear how you bake this in.
Is an interesting application. Yeah. So in terms of giving our children an allowance. So we've thought about that both ways. Should you give an allowance? Shouldn't you? We came down on the idea of yes. Why? Because we think that this is a good way for them to start very young to make choices. Yeah. And to be allowed to experience the consequences of those choices. Yeah. And so they each have 3 mason jars. Mm-hmm. One is for charity, for giving, and so we encourage them to tithe. One is for savings. Yeah. They can save as much as they like, and then one is for spending. Yeah. And again, they can distribute it as they choose. Yeah. And as we've gone through this experience, I had one of my children said they really wanted to buy a certain thing, a certain Legos, toy, and they saved up and they got enough money and they bought it. And then a few weeks later, and they used it and they loved it. But a few weeks later, there was a different Legos-ish toy that cost more, and they couldn't afford to buy that because they bought the thing 2 or 3 weeks before. Right. And it really upset them a bit. And I have to admit, loving this moment. Not loving that they're upset, but loving that they have to grapple with the trade-offs.
Right.
And we were able to talk through it.
It really hits home.
Challenge.
Yeah.
You've got finite resources in life. Yeah. So how do you choose where you're going to save and what you're not going to save? Yeah. I mean, the outcome of that story, I mean, it's all ongoing, right? Children it's a chaotic
every
process.
Day.
And
yeah.
Every day, it's like the ultimate startup.
Yeah.
It's never the same one day after the next.
Right.
But the outcome of that particular story is that they did save enough money for that toy they wanted, but they chose instead to put it into long-term savings, which is a pretty big deal, because long-term savings for us means like all they can do with their long-term savings is buy a car or like college. It's like there's like 2 or 3 things that they're saving.
Not law school.
Not law school. No, I'm not anti-law school at all. I think there are some lawyers that are fantastic.
Just not for you. Yeah.
Not for us.
Yeah.
So that's one practical way.
Yeah.
But you saying that, though, I can riff on that for a moment because more broadly, that is the goal for our children is how to help them to be able to find their essential and unique mission in life.
Right.
We just everyone always has an emotional reaction to this, but we just chose recently, about 18 months ago, started homeschooling our 2 eldest. And we never expected to do that. Actually,
How old?
Was as a result. Now they are almost 13 and almost 12.
Okay.
So this is middle school.
Yeah.
Instead of going to middle school, we did one child and then we did the other. And it was as a result of talking to the person you mentioned earlier on, the story of the microloan, the protect
Really?
the asset story. Yeah. So I know the person in question quite well. And when they took time off because of the fatigue, they ended up homeschooling because they wanted to go somewhere that was they went to France, if you recall, and they were just creating space, and they created it together. And they read a few books. When they recommended those books to us, we read them, and we found ourselves really curious about what you could do if you were helping your children right from an early age grapple with the questions that typically people only grapple with at 30 or in the midlife crisis in 40 or something, which is, what should I do with my life? And so as a result, over the last year and a half, our oldest two children are facing those questions just automatically, because they're not being told exactly what they have to do with every minute of their school day, and it's very enjoyable to watch this and to try. My wife does a terrific job at this, creating a nurtured environment where they can just keep exploring this. And it comes back to the social movement. I just believe people actually have a human right to design a life that they see as being meaningful, one that matters. And despite that being the case, and despite most people agreeing with that, as soon as they hear that, it isn't what is done. How much time is spent with children in a traditional school focused on that question? Ask, how old are you before you start asking the question, what's my highest point of contribution? Pretty much that doesn't happen. That pretty much doesn't happen. Maybe a bit in college, but then you're in a job and I think that life.
You're too busy living life to think about it. Yeah,
it is. I think. I mean, there's a movement here in locally in the Bay Area called Race to Nowhere. The Race to Nowhere. And there's the risk of this, right? That you have children who go to school, to take exams, to go to college, to get a job, to what? To what end?
Right.
And I think that we could start much earlier.
Yeah. I don't know if you had a chance to talk with Jim Shields. I think he's a member of the 25K Genius Network where you spoke, but he has a company. I interviewed him, and the whole conversation on raising entrepreneurs, raising independent thinkers more. And they have a company that I'll send it to you if you like it. You could look at it, but they homeschool, and they have this whole methodology. It's interesting as well. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, send it to me.
And what are the books that they recommend? So, I mean, the one I just read and we had a meeting about is At the Opposite of Spoiled, which sounds similar to the Mason jars.
I was going to mention that. It's exactly where we got the idea from for the Mason jars. Is The Opposite of Spoiled. I love that book. Yeah.
So what were the other books you said? The person executive suggested a couple books. Do you remember any of them, or you're looking at me like no?
You're not allowed to ask that question. I can't remember. No.
It's okay.
I can't remember.
Yeah, it's okay. But I know The Opposite of Spoiled was a fantastic one. And so thank you for talking about that. I wanted you to riff on the kids for a little bit, because I think when it comes down to it, that's essentialism, right? You want to make sure you have that space for your family, and for those events, like you said, we gotta be done in 11 minutes because you have a event that you have to go with your children, which is the most important and the priority.
Right.
So the naming, how do you decide what to call this movement? When did you fixate on essentialism?
I actually appreciate that question. I went through a very long naming process.
Yeah.
I'm big about words because without words, without naming something, you can't talk about it.
Right.
In the most literal, practical sense, you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
You can't talk about non-essentialism unless you have a word for it.
Right.
You can't say, hey, I want to be an essentialist unless you have the word, and so on. And so I went through.
Yeah, tell me about some of them. What are some of the chopping block ones?
Oh my, that's a great question. I'd have to look those back up now, but I
want to hear your thought process with this, Greg. Yeah. What?
Yeah, I mean, we had, every kind of description with ist or ism afterwards. So instead of non-essentialist, we had trivialist at one point. We had everythingist. On the essentialist side, I will say this, that there was a key moment in the in the decision process where I was choosing between two books I wanted to write. And one was about leadership by design, which I really liked the idea of. In fact, was quite a fully developed book design.
Does it go off of multipliers? I mean, was it like like a sequel to multipliers, or not really?
It was that was one of the reasons, because I'd spent so much time in multipliers land that I think I was leaning towards a leadership book, and it was some of the in a sense it was some of the data that I'd come across that was contradictory to what I had found before. Yeah. But as I was trying to get there with it, I actually sort of couldn't get. I either woke up in the middle of the night one time, I just couldn't get to sleep. I don't remember which now, but I just kept feeling like, no, you're on the wrong thing. This isn't the right path. And again and again, I kept feeling, you're supposed to write this other book, and the book at the time was called The Story of Clarity. And I just kept feeling it, and finally, I couldn't get to sleep until I sort of agreed and made this decision. I'm going to do The Story of Clarity. Yeah. And that was the book to go. So you can imagine I can't remember all the names. I wish I had them right now, because that would be a fun conversation about the alternative words. Right. But finally they came together. They didn't come together until actually the book agent and I were talking about it, and they just clicked into place. Yeah.
Because you're right. It is like naming that movement is such a huge decision, and that's the title of the book, and that's what people are going to talk about. So I knew you had just toiled over, what do we call this thing? Yeah.
It's absolutely true. There was tremendous effort. I think this is true. I mean, in books generally, I think there's a bit of an error that's made with not thinking deeply enough about exactly the right title. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact that most books are passion projects for somebody. And so it's almost like within people, because it means so much to them, and because they can feel that it would be so powerful if people lived the thing that they're learning about, it seems like it's enough. And so when it comes to the naming of the book, it's almost like the last thing they think about, or it's an afterthought or something. And I think you've got to be thinking about that right from the beginning, because that is the first thing someone else will see. But that was intense. It was actually an intense process.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of great stories in this book. I mean, you reference Michael Phelps, Bob Bowman, Derek Sivers, Malcolm Gladwell. My personal favorite was the Cynthia story. That, for me, hit home in a huge way. Tell a little bit about that particular story in the book.
Well, it's the story of an 11-year-old girl whose father took seriously his responsibilities to try and create great dates, great experiences. He traveled a lot, and he was going to San Francisco one time, and so she was coming with him, and they had planned for weeks and weeks in advance that they would go together, and they had planned everything down to the detail of what they would do. He would speak at the conference till whatever, I don't remember now, 4:00, and then from 4:00 then they were going to go down into Chinatown to eat her favorite Chinese food, and then they were going to watch a movie, then they were going to go back to the hotel, watch another flick, and then order room service, Sundays, everything. And they had lived that vision in advance, talking about it, envisioning it together, looking forward to it together. When the day came, when they were in San Francisco, an old friend comes up to them right after the conference and says, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. I brought my wife here together. You should come to our place tonight for a fabulous,
like seafood dinner.
Looking over the Bay Area, looking over the Bay, and just totally describes this whole picture." And Cynthia, the 11-year-old daughter, says, she inside, she didn't say anything outside it, but inside she just suddenly felt so deflated. She can't stand seafood. She knows that it'll be adult conversation. She's just barely a part of it. And all of a sudden she hears her father say, "Oh, no, I would love to do that, but it's absolutely impossible. We've scheduled everything down to the last minute." and he just grabs her hand and runs out.
Yeah.
And they continue it. Cynthia told me that story just a few weeks after her father, Stephen R. Covey, died.
Yeah.
And she said, look, this is the number one story that I hold on to as I think about his life, is that in this moment, he actually chose me. He made the trade-off, chose me over this old friend who was there and definitely was trying to influence him. And so that's a very touching story to me.
Yeah, it was touching because I had to do some soul searching in that moment and think, I hope I would have made that same decision.
Right.
But would I have? You know? And that's kind of scary to me. Like, would I have? So I'm glad you include that in the book, because then when this occurs, which I'm sure it will, I have 2 daughters, I will grab their hand and go on that excursion. So, yeah.
Well, I think in the story, there's a variety of things going on in that story that I think are important. But one of them, I actually talked to Stephen about that story. I knew about the story before, and I talked to him about it. And his whole point was, you've got to have a clearer yes, stronger yes burning inside of you if you want to say no in those moments. I mean, the key to the story isn't just his prioritization. It's that he really had a thorough plan. If you don't have a thorough plan at an organization, then your calendar gets filled up with other things. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. The key is actually doing the work in the first place.
Right.
I mean, I just had an experience yesterday with this. It was very surreal. So yesterday was my media day. So it was just appointment after appointment of interviews, and I had failed to have my assistant put on my calendar some key event, which was the winter sing at my son's school.
Yeah.
And he'd said to me a couple of days before that he really wanted me to go. And then when I checked the calendar, suddenly I'm like, oh, there are all these people.
Yeah.
It's quite an important day. They've been scheduled way in advance, way in advance.
Right. And
it's my failure to have put this on, to have protected that window in advance as I could have done. And I want to come back to this point in a moment, because Stephen Covey does something that I throughout his life that I think is key.
Yeah.
But I'm on a call, I'm having a conversation not unlike this one, telling them about the story of the hospital story with my wife.
Right.
As my wife waves to me to go to the winter sing, and she's walking out the door, and I had this very out of body moment of, are you going to have a mini reliving of this while you're telling somebody about what you learned?
Right.
Or are you going to make a different choice? And there was a technical glitch on the phone right as that I was having that thought that just helped me to go, oh, just reschedule this. Just say, hey, listen.
God came down and struck the internet connection.
Maybe, but it was just enough that I was like, this is an option. And actually, I just said, listen, I said, we're a little rushed right now. Let's, would you like to schedule this at a time that was less rushed for you and I?
Yeah.
Yes, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And it was, in that case, I know it's not always that easy, but in this case, it really didn't feel easy until you say it, and then it was solved. And it is, I have now burned in my mind, and I don't think I will ever forget the image of us all, because oldest 2 girls, my wife and I, go into this winter sing together, and we're there and we're waving at him, and the look on his face when he saw us, and he knew that they were all going to be there, but I hadn't committed that I would be. If I promised my children anything, I will do it.
Right.
Absolutely. So I make promises pretty sparingly and keep them pretty very faithfully. If I say I promise. But anyway, so he didn't expect that I would be there, but to see that moment, I thought, it's that moment versus having finished this interview, which was so easy to reschedule. So it was a happy moment for me. I'm not in any way suggesting I always get this right now, but it was nice to not have the second fail and to not be sharing the fail story today. I'm not afraid to tell that. I'm not afraid to fail. I'm not afraid to admit my failures. I just am glad I don't have to tell that story today.
Right. So we're right at the time. Greg, so I want to wrap up, but will you finish your thought about the Stephen Covey? You said you want to come back to the Stephen Covey point.
That's a great point. So what he did is he would schedule 3 years in advance. Get your head around that.
I can't.
Like on the calendar.
Yeah.
So obviously you can't schedule everything 3 years in advance. I mean that's right, and you don't want to be so inflexible either, probably. But he would be on the phone to the schools saying, look, what is the schedule, not just for this whole year, but what about next year? Do you have any of next year scheduled? And so that he could put as much of that on the calendar as possible, as far in advance as possible.
Yeah.
And really that was the key. And so I actually already had a conversation with my EA and just said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try and copy that.
Yeah.
We're going to try and get all the schedule with the school as far in advance as possible, and we're going to put all of it in the calendar. So that as we're scheduling keynotes or workshops or interviews, we're always protecting we're always protecting that space.
Yeah. Greg, so many more questions, no more time. I appreciate your time. Where should we point people towards to check out online?
Look, I think the answer is gregmckeown.com still.
Yeah.
Although, depending on when this is actually going live, thisinc.co is going to be a sort of sneak peek as to what we're going to be rolling out in 2016. Because
That's
we're not
cool.
We're trying to do the social movement, but we're also trying to provide people with the capabilities and some of the tools that would help people to do this inside of their teams and the organizations and so on. So
you prefer thisinc.co, right? Okay. We'll link both of them up, but I want to put that in the lower third for the whole interview. I'm honored that you did this. I know you're essentialist, and so you had a lot of choices. So thank you for choosing and talking about this with Inspired Insider.
Hey, it's really my pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.